You know, you're getting older when you have to start referring to hobbies as adult hobbies rather than just calling them hobbies. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex. Welcome back to my channel. I'm a lifestyle content creator here on YouTube, and today's video is going to be the first in like a series of videos that I am starting into video essays and social commentary. Now, these videos are the only things I watch on YouTube, so it's been a long time coming since I have been like starting to show interest in doing these on my own, and I swear I have like a ton of drafts on my Notion page of these types of commentary videos that I have just never filmed. But recently I have been fascinated by hobbies, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And I think this all recently came up because I just started becoming invested in 3 new hobbies as an adult. And I think also on social media, I don't know about you, but my For You page and Explore page is all like adult hobbies, or like day 1 of trying something new, day 1 of exploring my adult figure skating hobby. Like, it's everywhere. It is consuming my world and all of the media that I consume, so I have to talk about it. And it also really struck me into how one of my personal hobbies, so I am currently doing adult figure skating. I'm taking figure skating classes, and I would consider it a new hobby of mine. And I found it really interesting how I'm so fixated on doing figure skating as an adult, but I also took classes as a 12-year-old, and I didn't really care about them then. I didn't really consider it a hobby. I was kind of like, dragging my feet when I was going to figure skating classes as a kid, but now I am sort of romanticizing it. So it really made me do a deep dive into, why we're seeing adult hobbies, the rise of adult hobbies in social media. And maybe it's just because of the age that I'm at that I'm currently fixated on it, but I feel like a lot of people are talking about it. So for your consumption, I have split this into several different parts. The first one we'll be navigating is what is an adult hobby. I feel like not many people know that what makes an adult hobby different from just a hobby, right? And I'll explain that. I have reasons. And then next we'll be talking about the rise of adult hobbies and why we're seeing them so much on social media and why there is the rhetoric in the first place and where it came from. And then we'll go into the benefits of having a hobby, because of course I can't talk about hobbies without convincing you to get one as well. Then we will go into my personal favorite part, which really sparked the idea for this video, is the monetization of hobbies through social media. And that is really where we get into the juicy bits of like my deep dive into how digital media trends have impacted the way we see our life. And then the last part of this video will be going into how to find your hobby. So I'll give you the tips and tricks that I have used to how to find your adult hobby and start investing your time into the things that you love.
Do people have hobbies? Like adults out there, do you have proper hobbies? Because anytime somebody asks me what my hobbies are or what I like to do for fun, I clam up, I get all awkward. I have no idea what to say. The only things I can come up with are bravo and going to lunch.
Okay, so what is an adult hobby? And there is really no technical definition to us. I think the general consensus is that a hobby / adult hobby is something that you do for your own pleasure and enjoyment, and it is not connected to, monetary value or your career or your hustle. It is something that you do for pure enjoyment, and it is a hobby. It is something that you do in your free time. The way I like to think about hobbies is, in interviews when they ask you, like, what do you like to do for fun? I feel like before I started my hobbies, I didn't really have an answer for that, which is just, it's very embarrassing. Like, I feel like in job interviews, they would ask me, like, what do you like to do for fun? And I'd be like, create content. And I realize in retrospect, that's not really what I like to do for fun. It is fun, but do I like to do it when I have nothing else to do? Like, if I had free time, would I choose to create content? Probably not. So I really think of it as that sort of question, like when people ask you what you do for fun. And now I have a lot to say. I do figure skating for fun. I do pole. I do tennis, right? A lot of my hobbies are like very active and exercise based, just because I do not like going to the gym. So I have found that sort of my personal priorities elsewhere in my hobbies. And I think for me personally, I think why there is this rhetoric or there's the phenomenon of adult hobbies is because we tend to romanticize hobbies more in adulthood than we do as a kid. I think a lot of us as kids have a mutual kind of understanding that hobbies aren't really hobbies when we're kids because we don't really have that many responsibilities as kids, or most of us don't. And so it feels like some hobbies, we might be goaded into from our parents, or they might not seem like hobbies hobbies because we have a lot more free time. Whereas when you're an adult and you inherit more responsibility and a lot of these life stresses and pressure to perform, it really is a huge difference when you have something that you can dedicate to that is not connected to your performance or your career or any monetary value. So I think even as an adult, when we romanticize our hobbies and, leisure activities, it's also important to note that as an adult, we tend to become more intentional about seeking out these hobbies. Rather, when you're a kid, sometimes again, you might, just be interested in something and then your parents like sign you up for like a bunch of classes, and it might not be something that you're intentionally seeking out. So why are we seeing this uptick in hobbies? I think in general, there are two parts to this, the rise of adult hobbies. We're seeing priorities shift in adults today, but also too, we're seeing a rise of people talking about adult hobbies on social media. And so in my deep dive, I found this really cool research that looked at, priorities of many Americans today. So this research, the study found that more Americans today than 2 decades ago rate that their community activities, hobbies, or recreational activities and money as extremely or very important to them. And so a lot of Americans today, a lot of adults are finding that their recreational activities are more important than things like maybe their career, or in this case, this study also looked at religion. And in the same study, the increase that they found among Americans rating their hobbies and recreation as highly important was sharpest among younger adults, ages 18 to 34. And that's also important as well, because I think a huge impact that's something that a lot of adults today, a lot of like my generation is experiencing was the effects of the pandemic. The pandemic changed and shifted a lot of priorities for people that I feel like made us really internally, come to terms with how short life is and how valuable our connection and relationships to other people and to ourselves are. And so I think this is shifting priorities from, work and career to self-development and your relationships with friends and family. So I think the pandemic played a huge role. And I think this study kind of shows that, how a lot of adults and people my age who were in school in the pandemic or going through really big life changes during the pandemic, how that shifted priorities for them specifically.
I'm me again. Feels like it's been years.
So then we look to the impact of media. Why is there a huge uptick in people talking about adult hobbies, or why do we see a lot of people doing their adult hobbies on social media? And I think the obvious answer to that is that, well, social media, I think itself is democratizing hobbies in a way we've never seen before. It is not only making it more accessible for people to, start new hobbies and giving them ideas, but it's also showing them that they can do the hobbies. And I think that's a really important note, right? Like social media is not only showing people like what they can do, because people are getting ideas from looking at videos of people skateboarding or roller skating, and they're like, wait, that looks so fun. Like this person's making it look so fun, maybe I can do it too. But social media is also showing adults that they can do the hobbies and that it's not too late for them to do the hobbies. I think a lot of the rhetoric that I've seen around content creators who like post their journey doing adult hobbies is that they consistently come off with this kind of like impact of like encouragement. They're like, it's never too late to pick up a hobby, day one of trying this new skill as an adult. And I think that's super important in kind of the language that we use for adult hobbies, because I feel like, especially as you get older, I feel like our generation as a whole has an emphasis on younger people achieving like big things. I feel like younger people get a lot of praise for achieving the same things that older people might achieve, just like at an older age, but just because they're younger. And I could go on an entire different deep dive to like child prodigies. I'm very interested in that world. But I think when it comes to this context, I think a lot of adults and older people or people my age, like even with figure skating, like take that for example, when I first, saw an interest in figure skating, I was like, I'm too old to take classes. And then I saw a person on Instagram documenting their adult figure skating journey. Like they called it an adult figure skating journey. And then I looked up classes near me and realized that they had classes for adults, specifically for adult figure skaters. So I think also too, it's important to shed light on how social media is very much helping people with their self-confidence, with their self-worth, and it's making people really see the impact of, individuals taking more taking more of like a front seat into their passions and their desires and showing people that it's okay to explore those passions at an older age. In another study that I found, actually done by Samsung Galaxy, they did a study that, researched 1,500 adults aged 18 to 25 years old, and they found that a staggering of 72% have been inspired to take up a new hobby as a direct result of watching clips on social media. That is a large percentage. And I mean, we've talked about the role of social media in, the publishing industry, in how it can, consumerism and all that. But I think too, when it comes to hobbies, I guess as a part of consumerism, because sometimes hobbies come with like a price tag and you have to like invest in it. But we also have to acknowledge that it's inspiring people to pick up new hobbies. If you haven't gotten FOMO to start a hobby yet, you will feel that after I go through this next chapter, which is the benefits of having a hobby. And sure, hobbies are fun and they're really, enjoyable, but they also have a lot of health benefits. I think besides the obvious dopamine kick that you get from doing something that brings you joy, or something, again, that is not connected to the pressure of life and adulthood, is very enjoyable and can lead to a higher life satisfaction, I think the benefits of hobbies on your mental health are well documented, so much so that, like, I'm not going to go too much into it because I think there are really great studies that show the connection between things like depression and anxiety and how hobbies can sort of play a role in that. That's not to say that hobbies are a stand-in for like professional treatment to treat like mental health issues. I think it's just noted that they can complement things like therapy. Like, I go to therapy and I have many hobbies, and I am not ashamed to say that. And also, sometimes that's just how it is. And I think that without my hobbies, I think I would be like way worse off. I think my hobbies and like my therapy like complement just my mental health so well. A chef's kiss, like perfect combination. And what I found really interesting in a specific study is that depending on the specific type of leisure activity that you do, you could reap different benefits. So depending on what activity or hobby you choose to do, you could either get psychological benefits, biological, social benefits, or even behavioral benefits. So if you're an introvert like me who might have some social anxiety and you don't really put yourself in positions to be social with other people or to be in a, environment again where you're like meeting new people, I think choosing a hobby that pushes you to be in a social environment like taking classes is really good. And especially I think for me, it has been mostly exposure therapy because I have like signed up for these classes where I'm with a bunch of people and I'm seeing them like once a week for 8 weeks. Like, it just creates this sense of community. And I think also it is to be said that it's really cool to get to know people when you're like learning a new hobby, because you don't realize how you all have like a common goal and you all have like the same passion. So if anything, you're just like putting a bunch of like-minded people together and you're inevitably gonna like create some type of relationship, or you're just gonna feel like relatable to them because you were all there for the same reason. You know what I mean? And so that's an unintended effect that I saw come out of me starting a new hobby, was this idea of community and helping me tackle that social anxiety and, even improve like my self-development and my self-worth. In a time where the US Surgeon General has declared a loneliness epidemic on Americans, I think it's especially important for us to be conscious about how we're spending our free time, and especially as adults when it is so hard to make friends. So hard. Like, I can't even tell you after college how hard it is to make friends and find community in places. Like, it doesn't just come to you. You actively have to seek it out. And so I think hobbies play a huge role in kind of reducing loneliness and helping people find their community. I think also too, lastly, I will say that with the benefits of hobbies is that the huge conversation among Gen Z and, younger people entering the workforce is that not a lot of people are doing jobs or, working in places that they love. And sometimes that just doesn't go together, right? Sometimes you can't always work in an industry that you love. Sometimes you just do it to collect your paycheck and then you come home to do something that you love. And I think hobbies provide that work-life balance that so many young people are looking for, like in their life, especially as they enter the workforce.
Day 309 of my adult figure skating journey. I went from backspinning on a forward inside edge to backspinning on a flat, so I'm slowly getting closer to that back outside edge.
So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the trend of monetizing hobbies. And here's where social media really comes into play, because we talked about the positive impacts of social media on hobbies, how a lot of people are finding new hobbies and they are, gaining the confidence to try them. But I think social media is a very double-edged sword when it comes to anything really, but especially hobbies, because of the monetization of hobbies. So you've probably heard of the term when you turn your passion into, or when you turn your hobby into a job, like when your hobby becomes a job. That is very evident on social media. And I'm not saying that monetizing your hobby is impossible, like it's impossible to keep your passion. I just think it's a very slippery slope. Once you start posting content about your hobby or the things that you do for pleasure, people start realizing that. People start picking up on it. And I think inevitably what it leads to is a lot of people starting to monetize their hobby, because what you start out as just posting about your progress becomes people engaging with your content. And what does engagement and followers mean? It means money. There's money behind that. The creator economy is booming right now. And so it is a very slippery slope. So I'm going to bring up the same Samsung Galaxy study because I think it was super important that study highlighted that 72% or majority of people from that study are finding new hobbies from social media. But not only are Gen Z learning new hobbies online, but in that study, as many as 4 in 10 have stepped behind their smartphone cameras to capture their own hobbies on social media too. So that's important too. Majority are finding new hobbies online, but also a lot of people are going to social media to document them. And in that study, they found that a successful outcome for almost half of those who've posted content about their hobbies on social media has been forming a new online business. So from posting their content on social media, they found that an outcome of that was forming this new source of monetary income. So what happens after you monetize a hobby? Now, once a hobby becomes connected to, say, your livelihood or your stream of income, there are inevitably going to be new stresses and pressure that comes with that. And I think that's important because why do we start hobbies? We start them sometimes to escape the stresses and responsibilities of adulthood. But when you monetize a hobby and it becomes a source of income for you, where sometimes you might be dependent on it to eat or live and pay rent and pay your bills, or it might just be like a side hustle where you're like gaining income from it, right? But I think again, the temptation is there and it just brings up new stressors, right? Like it brings up new stresses of like answering your DMs, replying to comments, making sure that you create engaging content. And also, what I always like to say is when people are always filming, as a content creator, it's very important to always be shooting ABS. I don't know if you heard that acronym. But especially when it's a content creator, it's because you want to capture these candid moments, and that it becomes even more evident when you're doing your hobby. You're always focused on what will look best for the camera, what will be best for people to engage with, what will be most, entertaining for people, rather than just focusing on what the hobby was contributing to your life before you started monetizing it. I think also it comes into play that when you start monetizing your hobby, or at least when you start creating social media content about it, social media has a way of, we talk about niches, but connecting something so closely to your identity that it becomes, you sort of have like an identity crisis. And I think a lot of people are finding that. I have a lot of friends, and even myself, I found with doing that with my hobby of reading, that it becomes so closely tied to your identity that when you no longer want to do that hobby anymore, you sort of experience this identity crisis, and it becomes just all consuming and even worse than you intended it to be. And I think inevitably you become more competitive, right? Like when you start posting your hobbies on social media and monetizing it, you're inviting criticism from people who do the hobby, and you sort of want to perform from the camera. You want to seem good at your hobby, right? Everyone wants to seem good or, put off this persona on social media of being better than they really are. And then you kind of get validation from, people commenting, and, people might not be commenting the best things. And I think it really affects you in that way because you start to see your hobby in ways you've never really thought that you would. I just think as a society, we all, especially young people, need to see that like not everything needs to make you money. I think that it becomes especially important when we talk about our passions, is that our passions are our passions and we do them because they bring us joy. And as soon as we shift that intention to something a little bit more nefarious, like making money or becoming famous, it just changes the game.
Get up here! Let's dance!
And so obviously I can't leave you off with a sweet note. So next I will be talking about how to find your adult hobby. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably already had some like fascination about hobbies, or you don't have a hobby and you're really looking to find that in the next year. I have some really great tips that I used in finding my adult hobbies when I realized that I just needed a hobby. There was a point in my life where I was just working so much, and I was realizing that I wasn't really doing anything for fun. And when I would do things for fun, I would post about them on social media, which to me wasn't very fun. And I do want to mention that hobbies are an immense privilege. I think not only, hobbies can be big or small, and some of the bigger hobbies where you have to invest not only your time, but your money in, supplies or classes or whatnot. Like, hobbies are a really great privilege, and not many people can afford to even do hobbies. They can't afford to spend their time doing hobbies because they have multiple jobs, and they're caretakers, like they just can't afford to. And so when I talk about hobbies, again, they can be big or small, but I think really thinking about ways that you can enrich your life, not necessarily through a hobby, but just doing something that can enrich your life, which is like journaling or crocheting, like crocheting while you're eating meals. Like I watch YouTube videos while I'm eating meals, and I consider that a hobby, like consuming content and like doing research and stuff. Actually, no, I don't. Not for the purpose of like creating videos, but like just for my own enjoyment, like watching TV shows and watching movies. That's like a hobby as well. And so the first tip I would give if you are someone who is looking for an adult hobby is to think back to your childhood. Really connect with your inner child and think about all of the things that you either wanted to do as a child and didn't get to do because you couldn't afford it at the time, but now that you're an adult, you have the access to it. Or something that, like figure skating for me, you did as a child but didn't appreciate at the time and want to see, still have a dream, I don't know, of becoming like a figure skater or something as an adult, which is like kind of what I had because I watched too many reruns of Ice Princess. Like I watch it way too many times. So yeah, think about like what makes you happy, what makes your inner child happy, and start there. I think another good tip, which I don't think a lot of people talk about, is just going with a friend to their hobbies or just like tagging along with a friend. I have a lot of friends who do their own things. Like I have some friends who do pottery. I have friends who go to book clubs and all of that. And sometimes I just like tag along if I can. I don't like intrude, but I like kindly ask. I'm like, hey, can I come with you? I'm very interested in this. And this is something that my friend did with one of my hobbies. I started pole like 2 years ago, and one of my best friends and roommate at the time, she expressed interest in it, and I invited her to one of my pole classes, like just to an intro one. And I said, hey, we'll go together, like we'll do it together. And ever since, she has been hooked. For the past like a year and a half, she's been doing it with me as well. We still do it together, but she also does it by herself. And so that's a classic example of what happens when you like attend a hobby with someone. It's just easier to do something when you're with someone that you're comfortable with, and it kind of takes the obstacle of entry in terms of like meeting new people and being stressed about making friends on the first day. So that's a huge tip. And I think another tip I want to impart, as someone who is a professional quitter, as someone who has had experience quitting a lot of hobbies, and sort of to the point where when I was reaching adulthood, I was kind of like, man, I can never stay on anything. Like my passions change so quickly, and I was always scared about like losing interest in my hobbies as an adult, is that don't be don't feel bad if your hobbies don't stick. I think that's why hobbies exist. They're there for your passion and enjoyment. And so the stakes aren't supposed to be high. The stakes aren't supposed to be high. That's something that I've finally learned, is that, yeah, that's why monetizing sometimes comes at a disadvantage, because there are supposed to be no stakes when you're exploring a new hobby. And so you're not supposed to feel bad if you end up quitting a hobby. You know what I mean? So I think that's a lesson that we can all take from when we're, even in career changes. Don't feel bad if you end up going to school for one thing and then don't want to do that thing in adulthood. That's something that I'm currently experiencing and wish someone told me that it's okay, and it's very common. And I think even for me, I have a few hobbies now, but I might not have the same hobbies into my 30s because I just might not be interested into them anymore. And I might take on a new hobby. Like, I'm really interested in pottery, but that's something I don't see myself doing anytime soon because I don't have the money for that currently with my other hobbies. But it's something I would like to explore maybe, I don't know, in the next decade. So that's all I have for this video. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation about hobbies and are really thinking about the types of activities that you are doing and why you're doing it. And if you have any more suggestions of videos you'd like to see me do commentary, or like cultural digital media trends, leave them in the comments down below. And also let me know what hobbies you're exploring in the next year. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.